My name is Camden, just down the coast. I work at home as author, illustrator of children's picture books. And the Big Truck Little Island book, which came out in May, is the 11th book that I've written and illustrated. But I illustrated about 60 books for other authors, mostly Casey Camillo, who is the author of Mercy Walker. You guys know the Mercy Walker books? So yeah, that was like a lucky thing. I'm just gonna call one day and say, "Hey, do you want to illustrate a series by Casey Camillo?" It's like, that's what you don't have to think. Anyway, so this year, Maine libraries are celebrating what are called Ocean of Possibilities. And so what I thought we'd do today is I brought 3 of my books that feature oceans as part of the theme. Hey guys, come on in. Good to see you. Also, these guys, it's 20 this time. So I thought we'd read 3 books that have oceans as kind of a theme. And then I'm going to show you one of the illustrations from that book. And the original illustration, I got the actual illustration I like here. And then we'll end up by doing the couple of drawings. Is that all right? That's all good. Now, if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to join in. I kind of like to keep things as informal as possible, if that's all right with you guys, and kind of make it a conversation if you want. But let's start with, we're going to go back in time to my very first book, which came out in the year 2000. It's 22 years old. It's still in print, luckily. Does anybody know what we're talking about? It's my guess. It features a guy that is not. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm sorry. I won't lose it the whole time. Yeah, my first one was called Down to the Sea with Mr. Magee. This book took me longer than any other book that I've written and illustrated. And the only reason it took longer is not because the story's more involved or it's bigger or anything like that. It's just that I had no idea how to make a book. And I made mistakes all the way along. And at first, I had the way I was talking and it got really kind of, it was more of a oral and it just got way too complicated. And so, so I had to sort of bring it back and rewrite it and make it much simpler. So this book actually took me 9 years to make, 9 years. And it came about in kind of a funny way. So I was an illustrator before I wrote stories. And I used to do illustrations for all sorts of things. I did illustrations for LL Bean catalog covers. I did illustrations for circus posters, Raymond Brothers circus posters. Does anybody have the lobster license plate on their car? I do that. So we can do some. But anyway, so I do a bunch of stuff, but the type of illustration I really love doing is I love doing children's magazines. So I was doing magazines for like Nickelodeon magazine and Disney Adventures, and I was doing all these magazines. And one day when I was working on a magazine illustration in my studio at home, this image popped into my head. And it was an image of a man and his dog in a boat stuck way up in a tree. I don't know why it popped into my head, but it was so vivid that I grabbed a scrap of paper and I quickly sketched it out. And then I set it aside and went back to work on the illustration. But I kept looking at this little sketch that I did, and I was like, first of all, why did that pop into my head? What's the story behind this image? How did this man get his boat stuck in the tree? How does he get it out of the tree? And that little sketch, 9 years later, became this book, Down to the Sea with Mr. Magee. So let's read this book. And then I'll show you a picture. And if you have any questions about it afterwards, I'm happy to do this. Here we go. Mr. Magee and his little dog Dean love spending time in their boat on the sea. So early one morning at 6:32, they made a decision. That's just what they do. Right after breakfast, Magee packed a lunch. Sandwiches, carrots, a thermos of punch, a big box of raisins, some sweet pickled beets, chocolate chip cookies, and crunchy dog treats. With plans for the day and enough lunch for 3, they hopped in the car and drove down to the sea. The pair left the dock at 7 o'clock and motored their way around Eagle Egg Rock. They passed by the lighthouse and by the old wreck, with Magee at the wheel and he on the deck.
They suddenly spied off. Happy to they can roam. Yeah, I have no problem with that at all. They suddenly spied off the bow to the east a big pod of whales. There were 50 of each, splashing about in a bright morning sun, feasting on shrimp and sardines by the ton. But one little whale, who eaten his fill, munching minnows and plankton and krill, was bored with his breakfast, and since he was through, he swam off in search of something to do. Now, Dee and Magee and their boat on the bay didn't notice the whale that was heading their way. They were watching the other whales put on a show, and soon that young whale was directly below. They escaped all ground. From under the sea, the little whale spied Magee and Dee's boat, but not them inside. He longed for adventure. He wanted to play. So he bumped at the boat in a most friendly way. Then the whale placed his blowhole directly below, and ever so gently he started to blow. Magee saw the bubbles, he felt the boat sway, then up went the boat on a fountain of spray. Higher and higher the little boat flew, as harder and harder that little whale blew. Then the whale blew a blast as hard as he could, much harder, in fact, than a little whale should. And that final blast blew the boat in the sky, first 30, then 40, then 50 feet high. The boat kept on rising, but it didn't stop there. Wind hit it hard and it flew through the air. Dee and Magee sailed over the sea when all of a sudden they got stuck in a tree. So there they were stranded, Magee's pup at the top of the spruce, 60-something feet. From their perch in the sky, the two watched in dismay as the whale far below swam swiftly away. Magee was downhearted. Just what could he do? They seemed hopelessly stuck, but little Dee knew the secret to get the boat safely unpinned was to rock back and forth and wait for the wind. So they rocked and they rocked for an hour or so, but the boat didn't budge because the wind didn't blow. And just when they thought they'd be stuck there all night, they spotted far off a spectacular sight. Away in the distance across the blue bay, the whales, all 50, were heading their way. They swam through the water in one long straight row and gathered around the small island below. Magee looked down at the circle of whales surrounding the island and raising their tails. He felt a bit nervous, a little bit tense, when all of a sudden it made perfect sense. You're trying to save us, he shouted with glee. Hold on, Dee, hold on, as tight as can be. Their tails slapped down with a thunderous crash, which in turn created a super high splash that covered the island and raced up the tree and dislodged the boat and set the boat free. Dee was so happy she let out a yell. Magee tipped his hat and the whales were there. Thank you, my friends, for saving the day. But they all waved goodbye and the whales flew away. And on the way home, little Dee had a thought. What about all the food they had brought? In all the excitement, they ate not a bite. So they saved it, had it, but they didn't have it. Let's see it. 9 years. It just, yeah, well, anyway. One of my very favorite author illustrators, in fact, probably my favorite of all time, was a man named Robert McCloskey. I'm sure a lot of you guys know Robert McCloskey. He lived he lived in Maine in the later part of his life. And he wrote one of my favorite books when I was a kid. It was called Burnt Dow Deep Water Man. Is anybody familiar with that book? It's where Burnt Dow goes, he's a fisherman, he goes out and he accidentally hooks this whale by the tail. It's sort of this tall tail. Well, anyway, there's a picture in the back of Burnt Dow where he's waving and all the whales are swimming off. And I basically ripped off, but I was definitely thinking about Burnt Dow when I was doing this book, and I really kind of wanted to nod to him. And this is kind of a nod to One Morning in Maine, that last bit of One Morning in Maine, where they're going off and the best ever closing line of a book, clam chowder for lunch. So it's definitely sort of inspired by the writing of philosophy, although this is much cheesier. So that's my first book. Now I want to show you an illustration from this book, and this is the actual illustration I painted for the cover of the book. Now, this has what's called a wraparound cover. My first book has what's called a wraparound cover, and a lot of my books do. That's when the picture on the front of the book wraps right around to the back. So when I get a book like this, I always want to see what the big picture was. I always want to hold it up so I can see the big picture. So I knew I wanted to wrap around covers, so I did the cover illustration as one big illustration. Obviously, the words aren't on the illustration because the publisher puts all that information on there, but this is how it works out. Now it's larger, but as long as it's proportionate, I can do it any size I want. So I usually work larger because I like to put a lot of detail in my pictures. McCloskey was famous for putting a lot of detail in his pictures, and when I was a kid, I loved illustrations with a lot of detail, stuff you could sort of get lost in. And so it depends on how much detail it takes. It depends on how long it takes me to do an illustration on the amount of detail. So, so an illustration like this doesn't have a ton of detail. It maybe takes 2 weeks to do a picture like this. So I have had illustrations take as long as 5 weeks to do one illustration for a book. And that's when you think, oh, this book's never going to be published. It takes 5 weeks to do one illustration. But typically it's about 2.5 weeks to do an illustration. Now I work in Paint on illustration board. I don't use any computers. A lot of kids think when I go to schools, they say, use a computer? And I said, no, but the colors are very smooth and very flat. But I use a paint called gouache. I tell kids it rhymes with squash. That's how you can remember it. But gouache is a water-based paint that you obviously mix with water, and you can add a lot of water to the paint, and it's really loose like a big watercolor, or you can use very little water and it becomes sort of thick, almost like an acrylic type thing. I usually start with the background and work to the foreground. So the sky on an outdoor scene is usually the first thing I do, and that's a blend of wet paint from blue to sort of pale yellow on the horizon. This is the actual illustration. So this is the actual painting. It's under plastic because I do bring this around to show people. And since it's a water-based paint, if like a little drop of water came off of the eve and hit this without protection, the paint would come right off. It'd be ruined. So that's why I have to be careful with this. But this is the actual illustration. Any questions about it? Any questions? Yes.
If you were to make a mistake or want to change your mind and you had invested days, maybe a week or more into it, do you have to start over, or is there a way, like if you wanted it to be white, to paint over it?
Well, you can, it's pretty forgiving. Wash is pretty forgiving. You can mix it with, you make it pretty thick and you can cover mistakes. But the problem is, if you have a dark color and you're trying to paint like a light color, like if I had something, if I had like somebody had a shirt on, it was dark blue, and I say, no, I want that yellow, it wouldn't work, because once the yellow hits the blue, it sort of becomes this muddy green, you know, so it wouldn't work. I rarely ruin illustrations, luckily, but I did famously ruin one of the illustrations in If I Built a Car. If you're familiar with that book, there's a couple pages in, there shows Jack, the main character, and he's in his room at night, and he's kind of working the floor. He's doing some drawings, and he's got some things around that are inspiring him to create this car. And so I painted the background, I painted the back wall, I painted the bureau, I had all this stuff painted in, and then I painted the bedspread, and that's where the words were going. And for some reason, I mixed the ugliest color I've ever seen in my life. It was like a combination of yellow and green and brown, and it was just, and I painted it on, and I looked at it and I went, oh, that's really bad. So I said, well, I'm going to soak it off, but sometimes you can soak it off. You can add a lot of water to it and then take a paper towel or a tissue and dab it off. And sometimes I get effects doing it that way. So I put all this water all over this, and then I started dabbing it off, and I put more water and dab it on. Then the nap of the illustration board, which is just like cardboard, basically, started coming up. It's like, well, that's not good. So I let it dry. And it's like, I still gotta get that paint off there. And it's like, how can I do this? And I had to, I don't know, I was desperate. I ended up taking some fine sand. And I went like this, and then all the paper started rolling out the paper. And I remember, I don't get mad very often. My wife says I build and then I blow. And so I was desperate. I was trying to do this. The paper was coming off, and I just lost it. And I remember I took the illustration and went, wham, over my knee, snapped in two, and I threw it across my studio. I went flying across the room, and then I just took a couple deep breaths. I pulled out another piece of illustration board, and I started all over again. But that rarely happens, and I rarely react like that. But you can make some changes. All right, enough of that. Don't worry, I won't get mad on you guys. All right, so the next book we're going to read is probably my most popular book that I've written and illustrated. It's a book that came out in 2009, and it's loosely based on a true story of a shipwreck that happened off the coast of Maine. It's a book called The Circus Ship. And this young man has worn his circus ship t-shirt with us. So this is The Circus Ship. Like I said, it came out in 2009. There's an author's note in the back of this book because it's loosely based on a true story. But I'm not going to read this one. This one's a little bit too small, so I'm going to set this one aside. And I'm not going to read this one for obvious reasons. Can you see the title? You guys see that?
Yeah.
Anybody know what that is?
She knows from this morning. She actually.
Oh, that's right. This is the Korean version of The Circus Ship, and my publisher sent me. I didn't know they were even printing this, but it's always kind of flattering when your book gets printed in different languages. But I'd never seen the Korean version. Now, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hey guys. So you can see by the title, it starts clearly with the number 15, and then it goes to the Korean characters. So I was really curious. I said, I bet that doesn't translate to The Circus Ship. I bet it's something different. So I was at a library last week over in Terrace, Maine, which is sort of Western Maine. And I mentioned this, and this girl came up, like a high school girl came up. She had her phone. She had this cool app on her phone that was a translating app. But what she did, instead of just, she took a picture of it, and took a picture of the cover, and then, like a couple minutes later, this changed to English, and it was printed right on the boat. And I said, "What does it translate to?" And she looks down, she reads it, and she starts laughing. And I wrote it down because it's so funny. So it's not called The Circus Ship; it's called 15 Animal Drifting Machine. These little Korean kids going, "Come on, can you read 15 Animal Drifting Machine?" But they will often do that. There's a French version of The Circus Ship as well. I didn't bring that with me, but that translates to The Happy Shipwreck. So, but I thought 15 Animal Drifting Machine was great. No, the version I'm going to read you today is, I think, will be a little bit easier to see. I'm going to read you this version. Now, these are called big books for obvious reasons. And publishers will sometimes produce these big books based on their smaller versions. It's the exact same book. They've just blown up the pictures. The pages are all the same. And they're really great. I was really flattered when this came out because they don't do it for every book. They do it for books that are sort of popular. The only problem with these big books is they are put together with 3 of the smallest staples you've ever seen in your life. And so the publisher sent me 20 copies of the big book, and every one of them is blown out. They just don't hold together. So this one's blown out too. I'm going to read it to you guys. I'm going to hold it. It may slip a little bit. You may see the pages slip a little. I'll do my best. But we'll read this next. A couple things before I read this book. First of all, there's a bad guy in this book. Do you guys remember who that is? Who's that? Remember what his name is? Mr. Payne. Mr. Payne, obvious name for obvious reasons. And when I get to Mr. Payne, I do a loud voice. So some of you kids, it's going to sound like this. Don't stop, keep going. I've got a show to do. Is that okay? All right. So I'm not yelling at you, but all of a sudden I'm going to start yelling, right? And the next thing I want to tell you is there's one page in the back of this book that it turns out is every kid's favorite page. And that's a page where all the animals are hiding in one big picture. When we get to that page, we will keep going and we'll come back and you guys can help me find the animals. Okay, does that sound good? All right, so let's see what happens in the circus show. This is the title page, obviously. This shows kind of like one of those old posters or old broadsides that they would put up to advertise that something was coming. And I want to show you one thing. There's a little ship on either side of the word "the" up here on top. And that little engraving, I'll show the folks at home. That little engraving is actually an engraving of the ship that this book is based on. It was based on the wreck of the Royal Tar. That was the name of the boat. And it sank off the island of Vinyl Haven, which is down off Midcoast, down off Camden, where I live. And I found when I was working on this illustration, this little advertisement, it was reprinted in a book. And it had this classic little engraving. So I pulled it up and I used it on either side of the word "the." That's just a little interest story I thought. All right, so let's see what happens. Here we go. 5 miles off the coast of Maine and slightly overdue, a circus ship was steaming south in fog as thick as stew. I got this one memorized too. On board were 15 animals who traveled to and fro. The next day it was Boston for another circus ship. The captain, Mr. Carrington, was honest and sincere. He thought that they should drop the hook and wait for things to clear. That means put the anchor down, wait for the fog to go in. But Mr. Payne, the circus boss, was terribly demanding. He stomped up to the helm where Captain Carrington was standing and screamed, "Don't stop, keep going. I've got a show to do. Just get me down to Boston town tomorrow, sir, by 2." Yeah, he's a mean. Then came a crash, an awful crash. Things flew into the air. The ship had smashed into a ledge that no one knew was there. The shattered ship began to tip. Oops, see, there you go. It began to tip right there. The shattered ship began to tip, then sank without a sound. The splashing, thrashing animals swam round, round, and round. The captain said to Mr. Payne, "Pray tell, what shall we do? We can't just leave them here to drown. We've got to save them too." "The animals?" yelled Mr. Payne. "Why, sir, what are you, daft? It's me that you should rescue. Pull me up into the raft. Now ferry me to safety, sir, before I die of cold." "Don't question me," barked Mr. Payne. "Just do as you are told." Through chilly water all night long, the animals swam on until they reached an island beach just before the dawn. They pulled themselves up on the shore, bedraggled, cold, and beat, then staggered to the village, unwearied while we waited. The people in the neighborhood had just begun to rise. And when they saw those animals, they had to rub their eyes. They thought they saw an elephant. But wait, how could that be? And what's that little monkey doing in the cherry tree? Soon animals were everywhere and into everything. There's an ostrich in the outhouse. There's a hippo in the spring. There's a tiger in the tulips. There's a lion on the lawn. There's a python in the pantry. It went on and on and on. Mr. Hood was stacking wood and nearly jumped a mile when he found the alligator sleeping on his pile. And Mrs. Dottie Daly, who grew daisies by the bunch, discovered that the zebra had been eating them for lunch. And Miss Fanny Fee, according to the rumors, the silly little circus monkey swinging in her bloomers. That's underwear, by the way. But everything changed quickly, like the turning of the tide. The night the abbot shed a fire with Emma Rose inside. From high above the abbot's farm, the tiger saw the shed. The sight of smoke and fire triggered something in his head. He jumped through flames 1,000 times back in his circus days. So he ran past all the people and he leapt into the blaze. Then everybody panicked. "Help! Help! What can we do?" When from the raging fire, something big burst into view. It was the most amazing sight, and everybody froze when they saw the tiger saving little Lotus. The tiger's risky rescue changed everybody's mind. The animals weren't bothersome, the animals were kind. And so they lived together side by side, they got along. It didn't seem like anything could possibly go wrong. That's called foreshadowing. Then Little Red Messenger came running with a word. Apparently a circus ship had sunk from what he'd heard. The animals are from that boat. They swam in from the bay. The greedy owner wants them back. He'll be here any day. So the people called the meeting and they quickly hatched a plan. No animal that came ashore would sail off with that name. Remember what we were talking about? The next day at the crack of dawn, a ship was at the pier, and up the lane marched Mr. Payne, whose voice was loud and clear. I am the circus owner. My ship sank in the murk. I've come to find my animals, put them back to work. He hiked until he came into the center of the town. His face was red. He scratched his head. He stood there with a frown. Mr. Payne looked high and low, but still he couldn't see the 15 circus animals of his menagerie. He ran around the alleyways. He searched the village square. He even checked a chicken coop. His animals weren't there. Mr. Payne was tuckered out, his heavy chest was heaving. Then Little Red stepped up and said, I think your boat is leaving. He ran off in a fit of rage. His ship was leaving sight. So he jumped into a rowboat and he rowed with all his. And from that day, they like to say their lives were free of pain. It was a happy, peaceful place upon that island. Now, since this is loosely based on a true story, there is what's called an author's note in the back of this book, and that tells what I found out. Supposedly the true story of the ship that sank. Like I said, it was a ship called the Royal Tar, and it was brand new. It only had like one voyage before it actually sank off of Vinyl Haven. A couple of things before we get back to that page. I want to show you a couple of things that are kind of interesting. So when this book came out in 2009, Island Readers and Writers, the organization based here on the island, took me and a historian out to the islands off the coast of Maine. We got a book tour, and we went to all these islands, and we read the book, and we presented them to the people. And we went to Vinyl Haven, which is, of course, where this story took place. And we were in a gymnasium. The town was in the high school, and we had an auditorium, rather, not just the auditorium. And we had the book projected on a large screen up so people could see it. And I would read the story and point out things in the illustration. And when we came to this picture right here, I stopped and I said, you know what I like? I kind of like this picture because I like that there's sort of an indigenous animal like the chipmunk, and there's a little sandpiper and some seagulls, and they're sort of watching in amazement as these crazy exotic circus animals swim in from the ocean. It's kind of like this shot. And I'll never forget this woman in the front row. It still cracks me up when I think about it. She raised her hand and she was kind of nervous. She raised her hand and I said, yes. Oh, no, that's not your kid. Don't let that get out. She raised her hand and she said, I said, yes. And she said, we don't have chipmunks on Vinyl Haven. I was like, what? And she said, we don't have any chipmunks on the island. She said, the only thing we have are mink, and I think it was red squirrels. Mink and red squirrels. Nothing else made it over there. I was like, are you kidding? I said, I'm in Camden. I'm just across the bay. I got my bird feeder, my wood pile, my garage are running all over the place. They said they never made it over there. Well, that was 2009. I went back to 2015 when I talked to somebody over there. I said, hey, when I was here a few years ago, they said they didn't have chipmunks here. Do you have any chipmunks now? And they go, oh yeah. So I can imagine a little chipmunk couples snuggled into a logging truck. But anyway, it was funny. That same presentation, this other woman raised her hand. She goes, that's Crockett's Beach or whatever. She said, that's Crockett's Beach on the other side of the island. And I said, well, I just kind of made it up. And she goes, no, that's Crockett's Beach. I'm not gonna argue. But anyway, so apparently I got the setting right. During the pandemic, a lot of authors and celebrities read children's books to sort of keep kids entertained during those tough times. And the actress Jennifer Garner, who apparently is a big fan of my books, she listed her top 10 children's books, and I think I have 5 of them are mine. She had some of her celebrity friends read books to kids online. And Steve Carell read. Now, if you're bored, you have nothing to do, and you want to go on my Instagram page, which is Chris Van Dusen Books, not Chris Van Dusen, because that's the other Chris Van Dusen that did the Bridgerton series. And you may see stuff you don't want your kids to see. I'm not sure. I haven't been there, but it's a little risque. Chris Van Dusen Books is my Instagram, and I've posted on there, Steve Carell reading it. And he did such a good job that I have since changed the way I read it because he did a better job than I did. You know, he did the little red messenger, he did this little voice, and it's like, gosh, this is so good. Anyway, so this is the illustration that took me the longest amount of time that I was mentioning before. This one took 5 weeks to do, this illustration. And I almost didn't include this in the book. I remember talking to my art director, my editor. I said, what if kids find these animals once, and then when they get to this page, it's just gonna be like boring for them? He said, I don't think that's gonna happen. Well, as you probably know, and I have to apologize to all the parents out there if you're trying to get your kids to bed and you're reading this book, because you can get to this page and go, we're gonna spend a few minutes, because every time kids want to find the animals in this page. So do you guys want to help me find the animals?
Yeah.
All right, so why don't you raise your hand and I will call on you. We have to find 15 animals in this page, and if I call on you, come up and just point out one and tell everybody what animal you're finding. Okay, you want to start? What do you start? Okay. What's that? Oh, we got 2 there. Okay. Which ones did you point out? The monkey and the gorilla. Okay, good job. You want to come up? So that's 2. We're going to find number 3. What's number 3?
There's also the kid right there.
That's right. That's Little Red. Yeah, good spotting. Can you find an animal? That's Mr. Magee. I was going to say that too. That's Mr. Magee. He's down there too. You're finding everybody except you. You want to find another? Did you find one? Oh, the giraffe. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is number 4. Help me keep track.
I found the snake.
Yeah, that's the python wrapped around that woman. Very good. Good job. Hey, come on up. This is number 5, I believe. The alligator. That's one of the really tricky ones. The alligator is right on top of the stone wall. Do you want to come up? All right, this is number 6, I believe. 6? Okay. We already found the giraffe. Can you find another one? What's that? The ostrich. Good job. Yeah, come on. You sneak out of there. You come too. Elephant's supposed to look like a rock on the hillside, and the camel looks like haystacks lying down. Very good. What book? I forget. How many do we have? Anybody keeping track? It's like 8 or something. Tiger. Good job. You guys, both of you guys, come up.
Bear.
The bear, right?
I was gonna say that.
Oh, well, you can find another one. Oh, come on. We still need the hippo, right? Okay. You want to go? All right, here we go.
The ostrich.
The ostrich. Good job. All right. The lion, yeah. All right, I think we're close. Let's see. Oh, we haven't found the antelope yet. Do you want the antelope? Right there. Very good. So let me just do a quick survey here. Did we find the gorilla? Okay, we found, oh, that's right. You found the gorilla. That's right. Oh, we need the zebra, I think. I think that's the only one left. Do you want a circus shit guy? Come on up here. First of all, you show us everybody that beautiful shirt you have. Zebra, good job. I think that's it. We found
The leopard and the one with the horns.
oh yeah, we finally opened the left. Oh, okay. Leopard's a hard one. Does anyone know what a leopard? Oh, you know what a leopard is? Yeah, very good. Excellent. That's a seagull count? No, but Mr. McGee counts. He's right there. Now, the reason Mr. McGee is in this book is because in all the books I've written in Illustrator, I always hide Mr. McGee in one of the pictures. And sometimes he's really small and sometimes he's pretty obvious. And the reason that came about is because my first book was Down to Sea with Mr. McGee, which we just read. My second one was also a Mr. McGee book called Camping Spree. It's the one for sale here. But my third book was a book called If I Built a Car. And in that book, it's about a boy who imagines this crazy car he would build. And at one point, you realize the car can go in the water. And I was just about to start that illustration. And it looks like it's just going to plow over this guy fishing in a boat. He's kind of looking back at this thing coming toward him. And I just had a regular guy in his dog fishing. And I thought, well, why didn't I put Mr. McGee there instead of, then kids who know the Mr. McGee book would like to find it. And so I did, and a lot of kids did like finding it, so I kept it up, and I used all books. Now, in the next book we're going to read, which is my new book, he's so small that I started getting angry emails, and it was like thinking, "Is this really a thing?" And people were like, "You left Mr. McGee out. We can't find Mr. McGee. Oh, we're so disappointed. Mr. McGee isn't in this book," and he is in the book. But he's so small that even my agent out in California, who has 2 young kids, they couldn't find Mr. McGee. And my agent told his kids that Mr. McGee had COVID. But he isn't there. And if you want, I'll put him out to you, or I'll let you find him on your own. So let me just show you a quick picture from this book, and it's the one with that rare vinyl haven chipmunk. This is the size the originals were, which is still larger than the book, but smaller than the big book version. And this is the part where the animals are coming ashore, swimming ashore, and the animals on the island are looking. This one's a little bit more detailed. Maybe this took like 3 weeks, but it's usually like 2 or 3 weeks, like I said. And again, I start with the background. So the first thing I painted was that sky with all the different gradations. And then I painted the water. And you can see the water's pretty loosely painted. I can paint the animals on top of the water, so that's why those are more detailed. But if you look closely, the water is just, I painted orange blended to yellow. And then I took sort of a blue that kind of turned green while the paint was still wet. And just took a paintbrush and kind of we've got these little waves coming in. Yep, right like that. And the little splashes painted pretty loosely.
Do you plan it all out with lots of pencil sketches first?
Yeah, I do a lot of sketches. In fact, most of the artwork is done with the sketches, really, because sometimes I will sketch a scene over and over and over again until I get it sort of right. And I think it's the most interesting way to show it. Like there's one of my newer books, If I Built a School. It's really complicated, and I made the mistake of writing the story completely before I even thought about the sketches. And I got to the part with the gymnasium, and it has this like perimeter pool and all this stuff. And I'm looking, it was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to illustrate this? And if I hadn't written the book, I would be so mad at that author because I had to figure it out. All right. So yeah, the sketch, I do a lot of sketches. Okay, so you guys are very patient. We're going to read one more book. And this, like I said, is my latest book called Big Truck, Little Island. This, like the circus ship, is loosely based on another story that happened on the island of Vinyl Haven. Only this one happened in 2009, not 1836, which is when the circus ship sank. It's a pretty simple story, but I think it has a pretty important message too, about working together, friendship, cooperation, trust, all those things that are so important when you're living on an island and you're depending on each other. So this is a Big Truck, Little Island. It's dedicated to Jan Coates, who runs Island Readers and Writers, which is in this next building over. And she runs an organization like Island Readers and Writers, which takes mostly Maine author and illustrators out to the islands to meet with the school kids out there. And you would not believe what it's like to be an author and to be invited to these one-room classrooms out on like French Borough and stuff like that. These kids are so hungry for guests and they treat you like royalty. It's unbelievable. So Jan and her crew are doing an amazing thing. And I thought since this book is about islands, there's no better person to dedicate it to. All right, this is the title page, obviously, shows the truck on a barge. There's something on this trailer on the tarps, and there's a tugboat floating it out to the island. So let's see what happens. Here we go. Out on the ocean one bright summer day, bound for an island still 5 miles away, a tugboat was towing a truck on a barge, a truck that was hauling a load extra large. The cargo it carried was all under wraps, tied to the trailer with buckles and straps, facing a twisty and treacherous ride to get to the field on the far eastern side. So the truck is here, it's coming into the ferry terminal there, and it's gonna go up this windy road that goes across the island to get to this field over here. The barge reached the ramp, the truck trundled off, it bucked up the bridge with a wheeze and a cough. Then slowly but surely it chugged up the road, lugging its 20-ton oversized load. One narrow roadway transected the aisle, and the driver had driven it less than a mile when he came to a switchback terribly tight, then felt the whole payload shift off to his right. You can see the trailers tipping to the side. I got a pine cone air refresher, pine tree air refresher. The trailer was tipping, everything slipping. The wheels in the way back were no longer gripping. They skidded and slid off the road and then thud. They landed and lodged in the soft, sticky mud. That's exactly what happened to the island. 2 cars in a hurry arrived from the north. Then from the south came a third and a fourth. They waited and wished that the traffic was slowing. They had things to do and they had to get going. I don't know if you guys can see, but there are kids in these cars, and we're going to figure out, we're going to now hear where they have to go. Meg had a swim meet at 3 at the pool. She swam the fly for her team at the school. And Barry was already late for ballet. He needed to practice his Batman frappe, which is actually a thing. And it rhymes with ballet, which is kind of convenient. Pete had a project to finish with Paul, a working volcano with lava and all. And Sue had to be at the dog wash with her sheepdog who tried to make friends with a skunk. Yeah. How do you think that was? Parental frustration soon started to show. How could they get where they needed to go? They stewed and they steamed, their faces grew red when all of their children convened up ahead. Since Meg lived by Barry and Barry knew Pete, and Pete was Sue's neighbor on Sycamore Street, and Meg was in art club with Barry and Sue, they quickly decided as friends what to do. Barry said, listen, let's all exchange cars. We'll borrow yours, and then you borrow ours. I'll switch with Pete, and Meg swaps with Sue, and later we'll trade our cars back when we're through. And that's exactly what they did. It was like, that's perfect. The parents agreed the solution was great. By borrowing cars, they'd no longer be late. And so they departed and went on their way to the pool or the dog watch, to Paul's or Bella. So you can see they're walking around the truck. But what's under there and what's going to happen to the truck? Let's see what happens next. And as for the big rig, that too was okay. A wrecker was summoned and towed away to the far eastern field, where later that night, all was revealed to the people's delight. So that's the, and this has an author note too. I'm going to show you that in just a second. So this is the author note I put in the back, and this tells what really happened on the island that day. And the person that really told me about this story was Philip Conklin, who started the Island Institute. And his partner, Peter Ralston, who also started the Island Institute with him, is a photographer, a well-known photographer. And he goes everywhere with his camera. And he happened to be on Vinyl Haven the day the trucks arrived with those giant turbine blades. It wasn't carrying a Ferris wheel. That's one thing I changed the story to make it a little bit more fun for kids. But it was actually carrying those turbine blades for those big wind turbines. They were building 3 on the island to supply electricity for the island. And this is a picture of one of the trucks carrying one of the turbine blades that were arrived on the island. They're huge. Has anybody ever seen one of those trucks go by? I saw one once up in the Sears Fort go by, and it goes on forever. They are really, really huge. Those trucks, and the show folks at home too. That's what it looks like. It's a big truck. These trucks are so large, and I know they're well over 100 feet long because these blades are enormous. This actually has 2 blades on it, sort of back to back. And the way they have to steer these trucks is pretty amazing. So some of you parents may remember those big fire trucks they had in New York City, where they had a guy in the back and he had a big steering wheel and he'd drive the back of the truck, and the truck driver would drive in the front. Well, it was kind of like that, but a little bit more high tech. The way they steered the back of the truck, which was independent from the front of the truck, was they had a following vehicle, a vehicle behind the truck with a driver and a passenger, and the passenger had a remote controlled joystick. And they had to follow, can you imagine what this would be like? They had to follow this truck up this windy little road on an island with a joystick, and you're steering the back of this huge truck as it goes around corners. That's how they had to steer the truck. And apparently it just didn't work out so well, because one day, that's exactly what happened. They went off the road. I did change some things around, just like I did with the circus ship. It wasn't obviously carrying a Ferris wheel. The kids probably weren't the ones that came with the idea, although I thought it was the best twist in the story. And the truck is obviously a little different. Some of the characters are all fiction. Yes. You found Mr. Magee? Okay, I was just going to get to that. So Mr. Magee is so small, and do you guys want to see him or not?
Yeah.
Okay, if you don't want to see him, close your eyes, because you might want to find him at home. But I'll show you the page he's on. So, so he's on this page right here, and you won't be able to see him. I'll point out where he is, but you have to look at the book at home. He's right there. And you can't even see him, he's sort of in the background. Piper, you weren't supposed to look. Did you look? You did look?
She couldn't read this.
Oh,
She didn't want to read.
I saw you turn your back, but then you came back. Yes. Oh, do you want to see do you guys want to see? All right, I want to show this one to you. All right, if you don't want to know where Mr. Magee is, don't look, okay? But he is right there in the background. He's about the size of a grain of rice. Let me show you one more picture. Over on. And this is the cover illustration, pretty basic. This was the illustration I used for the cover. Again, the first thing I painted was the sky, which and that's always kind of makes me the most nervous, painting the sky. It seems like it's pretty simple, but you're working with really rough food, and you have to blend it, so it has this nice blend down to the horizon. So that was a little tricky. And when I usually paint it, sit back and cross my fingers and hope it dries right. And this one did dried to be pretty gradual and nice blend. So that's any questions about the oh, Mr. Magee? Yeah, I have these paintbrushes that are quadruple zero impactors. They have about 5 hairs in them, and that's what I use for the detail. Yeah, it's really small. Yeah. Yes. Good question. Well, I told you about how the first book came about, like it just popped in my head. This one I actually heard about. I heard about the story, And I thought it was just a good example of working together, so I figured, sorry, but I like I did, I changed some things around. But sometimes the ideas just kind of pop into my head, and I just, I have to write them down, see, so I can remember. Sometimes, sometimes I read something, sometimes it comes from a sketch. Like I said, sometimes I even have dreams, which I think would be a good book. In fact, I had this dream once. I wonder if you kids, I wonder if this happens to you. Do you ever have a dream that's so good when you wake up, you're bummed out, and you want to try to get back in the dream? So you lie back down, you close your eyes, you're trying to get back. Well, I had one of those dreams. I remember this was about 3 years ago, and it was my bicycle could fly. And I took my bicycle up my driveway kind of goes up to the road. And I took it up and it just lifted off the ground. And I had a big tree at the end of my driveway and I went around the tree and I kind of banking around. My neighbor came out. And it's very vivid to me. And they were waving and I was waving, and they were waving at me, and I was going around the neighborhood and I woke up. Like, I was like, oh, and I rolled back down. I was like, I want to get back on the bike. Didn't of course work, but I did write down my new flying bike. I just wrote a little scrap of paper and I have a folder at home with all sorts of story ideas. Some may become books, some probably never will, but I always write down any ideas that pop into my head. Anybody else have any other questions? I think we're going to end with just a couple of quick drawings, if you guys don't mind. Any other questions about books? Yes.
What's some advice for, aspiring to be writers, illustrators, artists?
Sure. If you have an idea for a book, a children's book, and you want to get it published, that's very common. I get asked that a lot. The best advice I can give you is persistence pays off. That means if you believe in your story and you believe you've got a story that you think other people would want to hear, don't give up. It sometimes takes a long time. It's not easy to get published, but if you keep with it, eventually you'll succeed. If you want to, if you're an aspiring writer, I would say write about things that interest you. If you like nature, write about nature. If you like horses, write about horses, and just write, every day, write like a paragraph every day or something like that. If you're an artist, or if you want to be an artist or an illustrator, one of the best advices I have is, well, draw all the time. Again, draw what you like to draw, but also kind of test your skill by drawing from nature. And what I mean by that is, take a sketchbook or a piece of paper outside and look at like an apple tree or something. The apple tree is kind of like this, and they have all these crooks and they have all these angles, and they're really cool to look at. But if you can draw an apple tree by looking at it and drawing it, then your skills are getting better as a draftsman. There was one college, I think it was RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, that used to require portfolio. One of the things they required in their portfolio was you had to draw your sneaker, which sounds really kind of silly, to draw a picture of a sneaker and put it in your portfolio. But if you've ever tried to draw a sneaker, it's really hard. You have to really look at it, the way the laces interact, and all the eyelets and everything. So it's just drawing from nature, drawing all the time. Drawing and writing all the time is really the best advice I have. So. Anybody else?
Do you normally do school visits? Do you do virtual visits?
Yeah, I do school visits. I used to do a lot before the pandemic. During the pandemic, I did a lot of virtual visits, obviously, but not so much when kids. I mean, a lot of kids stayed home. So at that point, I was doing just some readings and posting them on Instagram, of my books, and then I ran out of books to read. So I started doing these drawing lessons, which are still on there, and kids, we could follow along and we could draw a character together, and that was kind of fun. But now I'm just starting this fall, start going back into schools in person, and there's information on my website, which is just chrismanges.com. So Yes, Kate.
So we have a gentleman, Will Pitts, who has his hand raised. He's online. And his question is, have you ever made a chapter book or thought about making one?
Oh, good question. Will, I have not made a chapter book. I've illustrated chapter books for Katie Camillo, but I haven't actually written one on my own. The reason why is because I really think of myself more as an illustrator who sometimes writes, as opposed to a writer who can also illustrate. Because I started out by being an illustrator, so I'm not going to say I never will, but I just think personally, I think I'm a stronger artist than I am a writer, and so that's probably why I haven't done it. Is that okay? All right. Anybody else? Yes.
Are you working on a book right now?
Oh, good question. All right, so yes, I am working on, well, I have another book coming out this fall. It's a book that I illustrated again for Katie Camillo. It's another Mercy Watson book. It's a picture book, so it's a large size. It's a size, it's the size of this. We did one before called A Piglet Named Mercy, about the backstory of how Mercy came to live with the Watsons. But it's a Christmas story called A Merry Mercy Christmas. So that's coming out. Kate wrote it again. And then right now at home, I'm working on the last book from the Tales of Deckaroo Drive series. And that's sort of a spin-off series of the original Mercy Watson books, again by Katie Camillo. Only this is the last book in the series, so there's some color illustrations along with some black and white illustrations. And it's about twice as long, and it's going to take me forever. I don't know when I'm going to get done, because it's like, I don't know, there's like 200 illustrations in it, and I've done maybe 12. Don't tell my editor that. Freak out. How's the book coming? I hate when I get the emails. Update. Anybody else have any questions? Yes. Oh, I get asked that a lot. I like them all for different reasons, because it usually takes me about a year to make a book. And if you're working on a book that you don't really like and it takes a whole year, that's a pretty lousy year, right? But if someone insisted, no, I had to pick just one of my books, which I think you are, right? I would probably pick The Circus Ship. I really do like the way it just kind of all came together. And it was a book I was really passionate about, that story. By the way, there is movie interest in The Circus Ship. I have to talk to a movie production company tomorrow night, and they're pitching their idea to me. So, but don't get your hopes up, because it's happened before and like they go that. Anyway, any other questions? What's that?
You would star Mr. Payne in the movie.
Well, you know what? Okay, so I'll tell you, this is since blown over, so it's not going to happen. But after Steve Carell read it online, Jennifer Garner, who's good friends with Amy Adams, the actress, they got together and they started talking about making a movie. They called Steve and they said, if we made The Circus Ship in a movie, would you want to be it? He goes, I want to be Mr. Payne. I bet he could do it. He's a great actor. He's kind of a chameleon. So, but I don't know. I always thought a good Mr. Payne would be Jeff Bridges. Yeah, with a big who? Danny DeVito? Yeah, he's short, but yeah, he would be good. Yeah, he'd be good. So my wife wanted someone a little bit sexier, I think.
Is it to be more historically accurate or more like the cartoon?
Tom Selleck. Okay, so we do some drawings? Yeah. All right. I'm gonna set this aside, and then we'll sign books after this. You guys have been very patient. Thank you guys for hanging in there. I'm just gonna do a couple quick drawings, nothing special, don't get your hopes up. You might look at this and go, he's the same guy that illustrated. But anyway, I'm gonna teach you guys how to draw a character. This is a Mr. Magee's dog. Do you remember the name? D. So we're gonna start by drawing D, and we start drawing D by doing a shape that looks like a candy cane. And it looks kind of like this. Are you gonna draw along? Are you gonna draw along with me? You want to draw? No, okay. All right, so you do a shape that looks like this. I'll step out of the way so you guys can see it. So this is gonna be the top of Dee's head. And then from here, her nose, and Dee is a girl dog, comes out like this. He curves back around. So that's basically the shape of Dee's head. Now Dee's neck, she has a little dog collar, and I do refer to her as a girl dog because she is a girl dog with a little dog tag, very simple. And then here we'll put her back coming down. My pen's starting to dry up, so I'm gonna switch pens. And she has a little stubby tail down here at the back. Little black tail, and she has one spot on her back right here. So that's basically her back and her head. Now we'll come down and we'll do one leg here. And one leg here. With a couple little paw marks, right? Simple. And then we'll bring her front here and her back haunch like this. Which looks like backwards. So that's basically how you draw her body. Now we'll come back and we'll finish her head. She has these big floppy ears that hang down, and they're really fun to draw because you can show a lot of expression with these floppy ears. Sometimes if she's excited, her ears go straight up. Sometimes if she's curious, they kind of go up in the air in different directions. But I'll have one hanging down here. And maybe the other one will have sort of maybe up in the air like she's hearing something in the distance. So I'll have this one go like this. Now, like I said, her ears are black, but check out this. Check out this bad boy. Look at this thing. So in order to save this marker, we'll fill it in with this one. This one's even the drier one. I got another one that seems better. Hold on. Look at these things. I think they're crazy. Watch this. Oh, that just makes me want to go draw something on some building somewhere or something. No, I wouldn't do that. Don't worry. You won't find these all over Southwest Harbor. That would not be good. All right, so then Dee has a nose, obviously, that goes like this. I always make dogs' noses blue for some reason. And even though I don't have the right color blue, I do have a blue marker. The paint marker, so I can shake it up a little bit. And we'll make her nose, well, that's not the right color, but you get the idea. It's usually like a darker royal blue. I'm gonna invest in some blue markers. The last thing is we do her mouth here, little smile mouth, some whiskers. And then her eyes rather are just two circles and a couple little eyebrows. So that's basically how I draw Dee, very simply. Now, I'm a little reluctant to color her dog color. I've got another paint marker, but I gotta tell you the story. So I was at this library last week. This was in Union, sorry. It was a really hot day and we were outside and I was drawing a picture of Dee. And then I took this red marker and I was filling in the collar. And it was the marker was and all of a sudden this red liquid started pouring down like this. And the kids are looking at me. It was they're looking at Dee at her. And I was like, looking, it's like, and the kids were getting upset. And I was like, oh, that's not good. That is not good. And it kept dripping down and dripping down. And then one little kid saved it. One little boy saved it. He goes, that's Steve's leash. So let's see if it explodes this time. Ready? Stand back. I don't think it will because it was a really hot day. So we're safe. All right, there's her collar. And then we'll make her dog tag yellow. Well, watch this one explode. Well, it's not working. Okay. All right, so that's just a quick drawing of Dee. Now I'm going to draw another character, but I'm not going to. Oh, that's okay. Can I switch? Can I take one of these? Yeah. Now I'm gonna draw a character, and I'm not gonna tell you what I'm drawing, okay? I'm just gonna see if you guys can guess. It's gonna start with a shape that looks like an egg. And so I'm gonna draw a shape just like this. And then over the egg, I think I'll draw like a seagull flying away. So maybe the seagull laid the egg and flew away. Anybody know what that is? No? I bet you will when I do this. Check this out.
Fair.
So that's Mercy Watson's self. That's the top of her head. And Mercy Watson again is the pig that Kate DiCamillo developed. And she's a big, happy pig with ears that hang down. And see if I can get this kind of view on each side. She's a happy pig. She's a hungry pig. And she likes a very specific type of food. Does anybody know what Mercy Watson likes to eat? Toast with a great deal of butter, that's right. So we're gonna give Mercy Watson a piece of toast. And we will do a piece of toast here. With butter on it, big pat of butter all melted. Oh, and guess what? It's still warm. We can't have toast that's floating, so we'll put the toast on a plate. And then we'll do one foot here, 1 foot here on the edge of the table. And then we will do wings have shoulders, we'll do shoulders. Work shoulder. That's basically Mercy. That's not a very good one, but anyway. By the way, that reminds me, there's another funny story I want to tell you guys. When the piglet named Mercy came out, that book Piglet Named Mercy, there's one illustration in that book where Mercy's a little piglet. She's about this big, and she's super cute. I just pumped the cuteness factor into her big time. And she's wrapped up in this little blanket, this little cozy blanket, and Mrs. Watson's holding, and they're kind of looking at her adoringly. And I went to a school and I showed the kids that picture. And this little kid in the front row was big in a blanket. It just cracked me up. Do you want one more drawing, or you want to just? I want to draw this. This is my, of all the characters I've ever drawn, this is my absolute favorite. We'll see if I can put color in here. I'll do it in. The problem is they're kind of drawing it, but let me try this. Maybe I'll put it. I'm drawing. One of the characters I love drawing is Eugenia Lincoln, the old lady from the Mercy Watson. And this is how I draw Eugenia. I draw with her chin comes down. She's not usually this color, but this is a pretty good dark marker. She has this big chin. She has a very long, pointy nose. Looks like that. She's always scowling, so she has big creases and like this. Some of those old lady wrinkles on top of them. Well, I have them too, so I can say. And then she has these cat's eye glasses that look like this. I'm sorry, you guys can't see what they're. There you go. And these glasses come down. And the glasses alone make her look even meaner than she is, just those angles like that. Her eyes are pretty close together. She's always mad, so her eyes are always, her eyebrows are always like that. And she's got a lot of wrinkles. Oops, I didn't do her cheeks. She did her cheeks. She has enormous ears, because I read once that when you're born, your eyes and your eyes stay the same size your whole life, but your nose and your ears never stop growing. Is that true? Yeah. Well, that's why I give her these huge ears. They look like this. And then she has a high forehead with more wrinkles. And she has hair like it's usually blue in the books, but that blue is running out. So I'll just do like this, just like a series of swirls. that look like this. And so I usually put a shadow under her nose. So she looks kind of like, oops, wait, I didn't put the wrinkles around her eyes there. She usually looks like that. Now, when I draw her, she's almost always scowling. So she doesn't stand like this. She usually gets her head really low. And let's see if I can do it. And she gets her head really low and her knee, she'll be really high. And she looks like this. And she usually like waving her fist at the neighbors. So I usually put her shoulders really high up on her body. They're like this. And she usually has her hands on her hips. She got this little sweater she wears, ratty little sweater. And it's something like this. It's usually something like that. Little lace cloths. So that's a really quick version of the you guys have been so patient and you sat so patiently, so I think we should sign some books. Unless anybody has any other questions? No? Okay.
Thank you so much.
Let's do you so you can. I get this, you know, this is actually mine. But this-
Can I get your help? Do you mind holding this one so people can see what these are? Undo. And then can I turn the page? Okay, yes, all right. Excellent. And who's this character? Eugenia Lincoln, all right, let's go back and see. All right, just a little bit to this direction. There we go. All right. And who's this? Mercy Watson. Mercy Watson. What's he having? Buttered toast. Buttered toast. And finally, all right, thank you so much. Yeah. I'm gonna end this now.